The emergency klaxons had fallen silent 3 cycles ago, but Alina could still feel the phantom vibrations in her bones. The Meridian Outpost, humanity's furthest settlement in the Kresh Nebula, had survived another hive incursion by the narrowest of margins. She sat cross-legged in her quarters, methodically running her grandmother's old hairbrush through her tangled auburn locks, a small ritual of normalcy in an abnormal life. The door hissed open without warning. Alina didn't flinch. She'd learned that privacy was a human concept the Kraxathi didn't share. Through the mirror she watched as Vex padded into her quarters, his obsidian scales gleaming under the dim lights. The young Kraxathi warrior stood barely 4 feet tall, but his species' reputation preceded them, apex predators from a death world where everything hunted everything else. "Human Alina," Vex chirped, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, emotionless words. "What is ritual purpose of grooming implement?" Alina smiled, continuing to brush. The Kraxathi had been assigned to the outpost 6 months ago as part of the Coalition's integration program. While adult Kraxathi were solitary hunters, their young, the cubs as Alina had dubbed them, were intensely curious and pack-oriented until their first molt. "It's called a hairbrush, Vex. It keeps my hair from getting tangled and makes it look nice." Vex's head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. His triple-lidded eyes blinked independently. "This serves combat function?" "What? No, it's just—" Alina paused, recognizing an opportunity. The cubs had been struggling with morale since the attack. Their mentor, Commander Scarix, had been wounded protecting the medical bay, and without his guidance the young warriors seemed lost. "Actually, yes, in a way it does." Vex's tail, thick as Alina's arm and lined with razor-sharp ridges, swished with interest. "Explain." Alina set down the brush and turned to face him properly. Before humans went into battle, some warriors would prepare themselves, make themselves look fierce and intimidating. Vikings braided their beards. Samurai tied their hair. Spartans combed their locks. It wasn't just vanity, it was psychological warfare. It told the enemy, "I have time to make myself beautiful because I'm not afraid of you." The translator couldn't capture the excitement in Vex's responding clicks, but his scales flushed from obsidian to deep crimson, a sign Alina had learned meant intense interest. "This increases combat effectiveness?" "Absolutely," Alina said, warming to her improvisation. "When you look fierce, you feel fierce. When you feel fierce, you fight fierce." Vex's claws clicked against the metal floor as he approached. "Show, Vex." What followed was perhaps the most surreal 20 minutes of Alina's life. She demonstrated on herself first, pulling her hair back into a severe ponytail, then braiding it into what she called a warrior's plait. Vex watched with the intensity his species brought to studying prey. "But Kraxathi have no hair fiber," Vex observed, his crest, a fan of flexible cartilage running from his skull down his spine, drooping slightly. Alina studied him thoughtfully. "The crest, of course." "May I?" Vex dipped his head in assent, and Alina gently ran the brush along his crest. The cartilage was surprisingly flexible, almost like thick rubber. As she brushed, the individual fronds separated and gained a lustrous sheen. Vex's whole body went rigid, then began to vibrate, a purring sound that Alina had only heard once, before when the cubs had successfully defended a supply convoy. "This pleases," he managed. By the time Alina finished, Vex's crest stood in perfect array, each frond distinct and gleaming, arranged in a pattern that made him look twice as large and infinitely more intimidating. Vex caught sight of himself in Alina's mirror and froze. His translator remained silent for a long moment before he finally spoke. "Vex has battle mane." The concept of battle manes spread through the Kraxathi cubs with viral intensity. By the next cycle, all 7 of the young warriors had formed a queue outside Alina's quarters. She found herself running an impromptu grooming salon, carefully brushing and arranging each cub's crest into distinct patterns. Vex appointed himself her assistant, learning the technique and helping with the younger cubs. "Raxix needs warrior pattern, not hunter pattern," Vex would instruct. "See? His crest curves left. emphasizes speed over power. Elena hadn't expected the ritual to mean so much, but she watched as the cubs' posture changed. They stood taller, moved with renewed confidence. Their training scores improved. Even their appetite returned, and given that each Kreksathi cub consumed roughly 3 times their body weight weekly, the quartermaster noticed immediately. The breakthrough came during the next hive probe, a small scouting force that tested the outpost's defenses. The Kreksathi cubs, crests gleaming in perfect battle arrays, held their section of the perimeter without yielding a single meter. Elena, monitoring from the command center, watched as the hive drones actually hesitated before the cubs' positions, a behavior previously unrecorded. After the all-clear sounded, Commander Scarix, still recovering from his wounds, summoned Elena to the medical bay. The massive Kreksathi warrior was twice the size of his cubs, his battle-scarred hide telling stories of 100 conflicts. His crest, she noticed, was unkempt and dull. "Human Elena," he rumbled, his voice too deep for the translator to handle properly. "My cubs speak of battle manes, of human grooming rituals that strengthen warrior spirit." Elena suddenly felt very small. "Sir, I was just trying to help with morale. I didn't mean to." Scarix raised one massive claw. "You misunderstand. Kreksathi evolved from pack hunters. In ancient times, before we developed tool use, grooming was how we bonded, how we showed trust, how we prepared for the hunt together." His crest rustled sadly. "We forgot this as we spread across the stars, became solitary, lost our way." He lowered his head, bringing his crest within reach. "Human Elena, would you grant this old warrior a battle mane?" Elena's hand trembled slightly as she raised her grandmother's hairbrush, as she worked, carefully arranging the commander's magnificent crest. Other adult Kreksathi began to gather. They watched in silence as their commander submitted to what their species had forgotten, the simple power of trust and community. By the time Elena finished, Scarix's crest stood in a pattern that spoke of authority, experience, and hard-won wisdom. He studied his reflection in the medical bay's polished wall, and Elena could have sworn she heard that same purring vibration she'd heard from Vex. "The hive seeks to isolate," Scarix said quietly, "to make each warrior alone, afraid. But humans remember what we forgot. That strength comes not just from claws and scales, but from bonds between warriors." He turned to Elena, his triple-lidded eyes blinking in sequence, the Kreksathi gesture of deep respect. "You have given my cubs something more valuable than weapons training. You have given them what humanity never lost, the knowledge that warriors need not face the dark alone." 3 cycles later, Elena stood in the outpost's main hangar as the Meridian prepared to receive coalition reinforcements. Admiral Zhang had been skeptical when Elena's report came through, but Commander Scarix had personally vouched for the effectiveness of the grooming protocol. The hangar doors opened, and Elena's jaw dropped. The reinforcement ship had brought not just supplies but observers, representatives from a dozen coalition species, come to witness the infamous human grooming technique that had revolutionized Kreksathi combat effectiveness. But it was the Kreksathi contingent that made Elena's breath catch. 50 adult warriors, their crests gleaming in perfect battle arrays, stood in formation. At their head stood Commander Scarix and the 7 cubs, including Vex, who had apparently been composing what the translator called a war poem about the human with magic hands. Admiral Zhang approached, her dark eyes twinkling with suppressed amusement. "Lieutenant Hoffman, it seems your grandmother's hairbrush has become the most strategically important piece of equipment in the sector." Elena could only nod, still processing the sight before her. Vex broke formation and approached, his movements now carrying the controlled grace of a trained warrior rather than an uncertain youth. "Human Elena," he said, "the Coalition Council wishes to understand the secret of battle manes, but Vex knows truth. It is not the grooming that gives strength. It is the trust, the touch, the moment when warrior lowers their guard to another and says, 'I need you.'" He placed one clawed hand over his heart in a gesture he'd learned from watching humans. "You taught cubs that asking for help is not weakness. This is most human thing of all, and perhaps most important thing. As the coalition observers began their documentation, and as more Croxathy warriors lined up for their battle mains, Elena held her grandmother's old hairbrush and smiled. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its technology or its tactics. It had always been its refusal to face the universe alone. And now, one hairbrush at a time, the rest of the galaxy was finally learning that lesson too.